All right, working on the gasser here again. Trying to answer the burning question that seems to be in everybody's mind. Will the drop-in auto clutch that's made for the Honda, that bike right there, work in the gasser? We know that the clutch pack for the Honda, the CR250, and this is an 05 CRF450R, those clutch pack part numbers are the same number on Barnett Racing. So I got to thinking when I read that on GasGas Rider, I wonder if my auto clutch will work in my gasser. And I'm hardly riding the Honda anymore, but the auto clutch has just made me be able to ride pretty much anything I can point that bike at. But the Honda's just so heavy and hard to start. Heavy Kickstarter, you know, typical four-stroke, and I just love the gasser. The Honda's just been sitting in the garage once or twice a year, so I thought, heck, I'll just put it in the gasser and see if it'll work. So just like the clutch pack, there's the Revloc auto clutch. Drops right in. So the clutch pack on the Honda, very, very similar to the gassers. The steels on this Honda are the exact same steels as are on here. They're perfect drop-in. They're both 1.5 or 1.55 millimeters thick. I can't remember exactly. So they're very, 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 as far as I'm concerned, they're the same steels. The frictions on the Honda are a little bit thicker. They're like, I want to say 3 millimeters, where the gassers are 2.7. I can't remember exactly, but the ones on the Honda are a little thicker now. That's the bottom line. So I took the auto clutch out, dropped it in here, and Revloc's directions do a couple things. When you install the Revloc auto clutch in the Honda, you put, actually there's two things you do. You take out frictions and steels, so you end up with 6 frictions and 6 steels in the Honda, and then there's a thrust washer replacement that you take out the old thrust washer, their stock thrust washer, and put in their thrust washer, and it's a little thinner, so it gives you a little bit more clearance here to put in more of the clutch pack. On the gasser right now, I just have 5 steels and 5 frictions, and I'd like to have more, and right now I'm just testing this out to make sure it works, and so far it works. So what I'll probably do later is get a thinner thrust washer, try to see if I can get a little bit thicker clutch pack. The more clutch pack you have, less heat it's going to generate, the longer it'll last, and that kind of thing, right? So 5 steels and 5 frictions, again, is a good size for this. This is working for me. The Revloc, I think, is about 10.5, I forget, 11.5 millimeters, 10.5 millimeters, something like that wide. In any event, it's a perfect drop-in. Tiny, tiny, tiny bit of play there. Doesn't hit the hub. In fact, probably less play than my actual clutch pack that I have in there right now is. So, perfect drop-in. The issue, the big deal with these drop-in auto clutches is creating the gap. And the gap is an important factor here. How you create the gap, there's several ways to do it, and I'm going to talk about the different ways to do it real quick, just for your understanding. So Revloc originally has an internal and an external adjustment that you can do with a manual clutch. Okay, I don't have directions from Revloc for a hydraulic clutch, so I didn't know if this was going to work or not when I first started out on this. But the bottom line is, when you put your pressure plate on, you have to create a gap for this auto clutch to work. And this gap lies between, I don't know if this will come out because the lighting's kind of sucky right now, lies between this part of the friction and this part of the pressure plate. So this gap that you create, Revloc says should be 1 to 1.5 millimeters. Try not to misspeak here. It is millimeters. 1 to 1.5 millimeters. So how you create that gap, there's a couple ways to do it. Originally, I had created this gap to see if this would work the Revloc recommended way, which was to put washers on the back side, on the inboard side of this clutch lifter. And what that did was the washers contacted this rim of this shaft on the outside here, this round part, and would put space between there and here, effectively raising the clutch lifter. Okay, so right there, the clutch lifter is bottoming on the clutch shaft on the push rod. That's that clunky here. Okay, so we put washers in there that would space it up above that, and I put those in, and set the gap perfectly. Took the bike out and ran it, and the auto clutch engaged perfectly, but my clutch lever didn't work at all. And I hate that because I want a working clutch lever. Some people, I guess, don't care about it, but I grew up riding with a clutch, and that's what I'm used to. And I like to be able to stab the clutch once in a while to rev the RPMs and get the front end over stuff. It's just me. So effectively, what happened was when I put these spacer washers in, I raised it up, distancing the contact endpoint inside this clutch lifter from the push rod, so my clutch didn't work at all. So what I did was I took a drill bit that was a perfect fit, sawed it off, and effectively cut it and cut it and cut it until it was the perfect distance, so that I had my gap here that I created by lifting this up, which effectively raised the pressure plate up about 1 millimeter or so, 1.2 millimeters away from this. That created my gap here, and that space inside there took up the space between the clutch push rod and the lifter so that my clutch worked. I was like, great, that's perfect. And I got thinking about it, and I watched Recluse's video on their EXP installation. And their EXP installation, you have to create a gap also, except that their EXP that you drop in actually they actually send you a whole new clutch lifter, this whole thing. And it's adjustable, and it's a great idea. Recluse has really done their homework, and it makes adjustability super, super easy, and super reliable. It won't ever move, won't ever give you trouble. What theirs does is they have it's threaded on the inside. They have a screw, an Allen screw I think it is, that drives down inside here. So effectively what you do is you drop this new lifter in. Now we're talking about one for the Honda. They don't make one for the Gasser. So their lifter doesn't fit the Gasser is what I'm saying. So their lifter that they make has a screw that goes in. You screw that screw down. It effectively raises the lifter, okay, and creates your gap that you need between here and the pressure plate without moving the clutch rod. So your clutch works fine, and you create your gap just by screwing that screw in. And then there's a set screw you put in there to hold it in place, and voila, you're done. Fantastic idea. So the third way to do it, and I've never heard anybody recommend it. Revloc didn't recommend it, but it's working for me, and I don't see why it wouldn't work for anybody else for that matter. And if any of you guys have any ideas about long-term issues, feel free to post and let me know, because I don't know everything about clutches by any means. Is to create the gap by putting washers on the outside of the clutch lifter here. And so that's what I did, and it works fine. So you have to, now this inner washer right here that goes on top of the throwout bearing, this is important. This is a hardened washer that has to always go there. And when you pull your pressure plate off, often sticks there because of the oil. So make sure you take it off of there and put it on here by hand. You don't want it on here and falling out of place as you put this on. You want to always put it on by hand and then put your pressure plate on. So here's my washer pack. This washer pack I had to play with to get it right, to get my gap set here correctly. And what I ended up with is, let's just see if we can measure this here, about 3.8 millimeters. It's hard to find thin washers. This is 15 millimeters wide, this diameter across here for this outer part of the shaft. These are 16 millimeter or 5/8 or something like that. I think they're 5/8. And in any event, they're like 1.2 millimeters thick, which is pretty thin. This is the thinnest washer I could find after going to the specialty hardware stores and Ace Hardware, blah, blah, blah. Maybe there's some machine washers out there. I'd like to get a pack of something thin, even thinner than this, to make the adjustability even easier, so that you could stack these and take them away as you need to. So the other important thing is when you put these against here, that they're not so wide. These are nice and narrow washers that's not so wide that they don't hit this, and they can't be floating around and screwing up your balance of your, like they can't be pushing over here, and that would screw up the engagement of your clutch. It would throw it to the side. So make sure they're as close as possible. So that's the thickness on these. Then, and that created my 1 point, and I forget, I think it's just over 1 millimeter is what it ended up with when I would tighten my springs down. Drop a feeler gauge in there, and that's what it comes out to. Okay, cool. So the gap is necessary to create in these drop-in auto clutches because of how the auto clutch works. I'm just going to visit that real quick here. If you already know, this won't be any news to you. Two pieces of metal, basically, that are sandwiched together here. You can see one's here and one's here. And there's a line between them, and that separates these two. There's 6 screws on this Revloc auto clutch. 6 springs under these screws. Obviously I have 2 of them out, so 2 screws and 2 springs out. I only have 4 screws and 4 springs in here. The springs in here are actually the spring tension. When you tighten these screws down, actually sandwiches these together. The springs inside here actually keep these 2 pieces of metal squeezed together like that. So you can see there's ball bearings inside here. These ball bearings are what move when the auto clutch spins like this. And at idle, it doesn't open very much, or opens very little, or maybe not at all. And so as the engine spins faster and faster, as you crack the throttle and open it, the engine spins faster, forcing these ball bearings, which are on the inside of the circumference here, toward the outside of the circumference. And these 2 pieces of metal here are ramped on the inside like this. So the ball bearing sits right here inside these 2 ramps. And as the clutch spins faster and faster, the ball bearings forced outward by centrifugal force, spreading the clutch, these 2 pieces of metal. And so the clutch expands. Okay, it has a limit of what it can expand to, though. So as it expands, it contacts the pressure plate, compresses the inside of the clutch pack, and causes the clutch to engage from the hub. I'm sorry, from the basket to the hub, driving the transmission. So, and then as the RPMs drop, the spring tension in these squeezes that back together, and you lose your engagement of the clutch. Is that it on that? I think that's it on that. You can take these springs out, you can put them back in, you can add all 6 springs. All that means is more spring tension and more throttle and more centrifugal force that it takes to open the clutch. So there's some fine tuning you can do here. If your clutch is opening, if you're getting too hard of a hit, you can take some springs out. If your hits, I'm sorry, you can add some springs because it's going to take more throttle to open it. So if you want to soften the hit, you want more springs. If you want a quicker, harder hit, just take out 4 and leave 2 in. And Revloc says you can have 2 or 4 or 6. Choose your, pick your poison, and it gives you some adjustability. So once you get kind of used to it and you get kind of thinking about how it works, you can make some adjustability, make some of these adjustments here. And I originally had 6 in the gasser, and the hit wasn't quite snappy enough for me, so I took 2 out, and that's about where I want it with 4. So put the Revloc in on the outside, put these washers, spacer washers in, again about 3.8 millimeters, that's what it came out to, and put this in. Go ahead and put my clutch springs in, and check out the next video where I'm testing it out.